There were three primary reasons that people either left the jobs they were in or wanted to leave the jobs they were in. The first, anything for autonomy. So that was choice. People wanted jobs where they felt things weren't being imposed on them. They loved some discretionary time. The second was they wanted to get out of a toxic environment where profits and short-term gains meant more than the health and well-being of the people in the company. So that was the second thing, which was connection. The third reason they left was a lack of growth and learning opportunities, which is the third psychological need for competence. So their psychological needs are not being fulfilled. But individuals don't understand that. So they go to the next job that offers them the greatest external rewards, perks, benefits, time off, whatever, and they get themselves right back into that environment where their psychological needs are not being fulfilled. So I want to teach individuals how do you fulfill your psychological needs so you can thrive and achieve your goals, and how do we help leaders create environments where people can bring their best selves to work.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership. Our podcast has been blessed with dozens of amazing guests who have talked about the ingredients of excellence in leadership and human performance. My guest for this episode will add to that rich dialogue. Susan Fowler has spent more than 3 decades upending what we think we know about motivating people. An internationally recognized expert on self-leadership and motivation, Susan has worked with leaders in more than 40 countries. She's the author or co-author of 9 books, including foundational works on situational leadership written with the legendary Ken Blanchard. Susan's thesis is bracing in its simplicity. Motivating people, she argues, doesn't work because they are already motivated. The only meaningful question is the quality of that motivation. Across 2 landmark books, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does, and Master Your Motivation, 3 Scientific Truths for Achieving Your Goals, Susan translates 45 years of self-determination theory research into a daily practice. She replaces carrots and sticks with a spectrum of motivation, drive with 3 psychological needs of choice, connection, and competence, and command and control with stewardship. In this episode of Leadership, we'll find out why. Susan Fowler, welcome to Leadership.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Roger.
So happy to be talking with you. Let's start with this. What do you mean when you say motivating people doesn't work?
Well, you touched on it. It's because people are always motivated. The question is why? What's underneath that motivation? And what the science is showing is that we need to shift our focus from talking about how much motivation people have to what is the quality of their motivation. And so the science has shown that there's 6 different types of motivation, and some of them are healthy and some of them are like fast food, junk food. And so what I'm trying to do is to help people understand that the simplistic concept of you're either motivated or you're not, or you're intrinsically or you're extrinsically motivated, that those perceptions of motivation have actually kept us from really tapping into the type of motivation where people can actually thrive and achieve at the same time.
So how can that one reframe change the conversation that leaders have with their teams?
First of all, it changes it because it keeps leaders from defaulting to what we've been doing for 100 years, or at least 80 years, ever since B.F. Skinner did his experiments on pigeons. And so we've been using motivation theory based on reward and recognition for 80 years. And so just by understanding that when you are offering people incentives and rewards, that you're actually undermining the very behavior that you're hoping to get from those people, which is their full being, their energy, their sustainable vitality towards a goal. So it shifts that. The other thing that happens is I think that when you begin to realize that there's no such thing as just a simplistic extrinsic and intrinsic binary view of motivation, then leaders will stop defaulting. I mean, think about this. If you're a sales manager and you have a salesperson who hates cold calling or hates, paperwork or hates, putting data in on their Salesforce app, if they don't like doing it, they're not intrinsically motivated. So what does the leader think? Oh, my only default is then I've got to give them external rewards because they're extrinsically motivated. Mm-hmm. And that is just not true.
Well, it sounds like a lot of leaders may be well-intentioned, but they're working against themselves, working against the science.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that because I know that leaders want what's best for their people, but I'm doing a lot of research right now, not just on leadership, but on coaching, especially in sport. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's very indicative of what leaders in the business world have been dealing with for so long. And that is you can't just look at performance. Now we know you need to look at the whole person. You need to look at not just their performance, but are they thriving as they perform? Because that's the only way to sustain high performance is if people are thriving while they do it. And so we now know how people thrive. We know what they need in order to thrive. And that's what I want to talk about.
Now, when you talk about coaches, the first thing that comes to mind for me is leadership coaching. But if I recall, you have worked with the NBA. Is that right?
Yes, not with the coaches, but with the actual organization, the NBA.
Right.
I'm a huge fan. I watch every playoff game, and I've been around coaches in sport my whole life. So I'm writing a book with a young man, J.P. Richard, who has coached Olympians to gold medals in skiing, like at Sochi, and he's on the Canadian Olympic team as a coach. And so we're writing a book together because he's used my books as the foundation for his coaching. So we know it works.
Right. The principles you talk about apply to a salesperson and an athlete, applies to a human being.
Exactly. And I can't tell you, after I speak, I have people coming up and saying, oh, I wish my little league coach had known this.
Yeah, right.
Or I am a little league coach and I think I've screwed up my kids.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to take these principles and reach all kinds of coaches. I just had a major health situation and I'm now going to be speaking to doctors and their staff because they saw how I thrived and they want to teach their patients how to do what I did. And they want to learn how to create an environment where people can actually, as I said, thrive or have optimal motivation, no matter what their challenges are.
Well, I'm glad they're smart enough to see that they can get value from this. It applies everywhere.
It does. And that's actually been a problem of mine because the science is so foundational, Roger. It's universal. So it's about human beings. It's not about race, culture, creed, generation, gender. And so knowing how to find a niche and share this information within a niche has been real challenging because I just want to say, everybody, this works.
Sure. Well, now you write about the spectrum of motivation that describes 6 motivational outlooks. Tell us about those 6 outlooks and why you say 3 of them are suboptimal while 3 are optimal.
Yeah, this model has, literally saved my life because what we know is that every time you engage in anything, you are exhibiting some type of motivation. So the question is, which of those types of motivation? And for example, you might have disinterest. Let's say that you have a goal and you're just disinterested in it. You see no value in it. You're ambivalent. So that's suboptimal. You're not going to be bringing or generating much positive energy. That's pretty obvious. But then there's external motivation, which is the one that I think is most prevalent in the workplace, where you're motivated because you're getting a reward, some kind of prize or incentive. And what we know is that it's impossible to be intrinsically motivated and extrinsically motivated at the same time. So whenever leaders start bribing people to do the work, they literally are robbing them of the potential for their own intrinsic, or there's some other motivational outlooks that are more optimal. So think about when kids go to school. They have an inherent love of learning. But what happens is we put them into school, we start grading them and judging them. And then if they're not living up to our expectations, we start bribing them.
Right.
And we literally can undermine their innate joy of learning. So that's the second suboptimal motivational outlook. And then the third motivational outlook that is suboptimal is called imposed. And I think this is the one I know I kind of wake up in the imposed motivational outlook. It's like, my first reaction, and it's just a personality type here, is, what do I have to do today? What are people expecting of me? What am I afraid if I don't do it, I'm going to have some kind of negative consequence? And so a lot of us look at our calendars every day and go, oh, I have to go to that meeting. What's really funny is a lot of times we're the ones that called the meeting and we still, I hope you didn't feel like that today, Roger.
No.
But that's the imposed motivational outlook. When you're doing something because you actually have a fear of what's going to happen if you don't do it, or if you're doing it out of anger or resentment. But fear is oftentimes, the motivator there. So it's being threatened. There's a lot of imposed motivation going on in the world right now where people are acting not out of their own volition and from their own source of joy, but because they're imposed, they feel like they have to do something and they're afraid of what's going to happen if they don't.
Well, you used a term a few minutes ago, junk food, which I think it really applies to some of this. You describe suboptimal motivation as junk food, energizing in the moment, but corrosive over time. What does motivational junk food look like in a typical workplace today? You mentioned meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I'm eager to get a transcript of this because sometimes you say it better than I do. So, so thank you. Yeah. It's like when you have low physical energy and you need physical energy, oftentimes what you'll do is you'll grab a cup of coffee or you'll eat a candy bar or have, a hit of sugar or caffeine or whatever.
Right.
And you get that spike in energy. But what happens is that spike in energy then dissipates quickly and then you fall. You actually have a crash.
Right.
So you have a sugar high and then a crash. And when you crash, your energy actually goes lower than where it was before. So then what do you need? Another cup of coffee, another hit of sugar, caffeine, whatever. When you think about physical energy, motivation is very similar because motivation is psychological energy. So when you have energy that's based on external rewards or fear or anger, resentment, self-righteous indignation, that will give you that burst of energy. But then it's going to fall. And then what do you have to do? You have to keep stoking the fire of fear, hate, loathing, whatever it is, or you have to keep, you'll do anything to win the prize, right? And so you might even cheat or, do behavior that's not appropriate. So what we are saying is leaders, I'm afraid, are so used to feeding their people sugar highs or junk food motivation and then wondering why people don't have the vitality. And then look at this generation. They talk about quiet quitting.
Yeah, right.
They're suboptimally motivated. A lot of them have the disinterested motivational outlook where they just don't give a heck anymore. And they just kind of quiet quit.
Well, and they're going to pass it on to the next team, if you will, the next layer.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I had the opportunity to meet the founder of self-determination theory and have him engage in my work. I say this with such humility because he recently passed away, Dr. Edward Deasy, and he's the man that literally put intrinsic motivation on the map. And one of the things he said to me when I said, I want to teach people how to use your work, your research, and apply it in their everyday lives so they can shift their motivation from suboptimal to optimal. And he said, well, let me just give you a caveat. He said, if you want leaders to help their people shift their motivation, they need to shift their own first. So every leader needs to look in their own heart and look at their motivation to lead. And if they're doing it for the corner office, or if they're doing it for power or status, then there's no way they're ever going to be able to create an environment for people that's optimally motivating. Or if they're operating out of fear of their own jobs or fear out of what's going to happen to them if they're not successful at reaching some goal, ironically, they're never going to reach the goal because their people are not going to be optimally motivated.
Several months ago, I talked with a lady who had worked with an organization that makes medical equipment. And they had some cultural, motivational performance issues in the organization. And they decided to start taking their people out to see the end users of that equipment. And it changed everything virtually overnight. They didn't see their job as physical, technical wires and buttons. They saw it as helping fellow human beings. It made all the difference in the world. They were doing the same work, they just put on a different set of lenses and they saw everything totally differently.
I love that example because what happened was that a psychological need was fulfilled through that act.
Right.
And so if you want to shift from suboptimal to optimal motivation, what that requires is fulfilling 3 psychological needs that every human being has. And without these psychological needs, we're never going to thrive. This is what creates optimal motivation. And the first one is choice. You need to think or feel that you're actually choosing what you're doing. Even if you say, you know what, I'm going to do everything you tell me to do, Roger. And I say that, and I'm doing it because I trust you, because I admire your values, we're aligned. I'm choosing to follow and do everything that you're telling me to do. But if I say, yes, sir, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, and I resent it, or I disagree with it, but I do it anyway, that's suboptimal. And that means that my need for choice or volition or agency has been eroded. I don't have a sense of autonomy. Now, what I'd love for your listeners to think about is what happened during COVID. First and foremost, our sense of agency was ripped from us. A lot of people felt like they didn't have the autonomy. You had to wear a mask. If you went into the grocery store, you had to, distance yourself. And so when people don't understand why that autonomy is missing, then they resent whatever it is they're being asked to do. It's like, that's why when we go on a diet and the first thing you say is, I can't eat muffins on a diet. And then you go to a company meeting and what do they have?
Muffins.
Muffins. And so you're like, oh, I can't eat a muffin. Why do you eat that muffin? It's because you're trying to regain your sense of autonomy and choice. The second, and this is related to your example of showing the end user, is that when you go out and you realize that you are taking care of people, you're making a contribution, that you genuinely care about others and they care about you, and that the work you're doing is meaningful. That's that sense of connection. So the first psychological need is for choice. The second psychological need is for connection. And that's what that company did for their people, is they enabled them to connect to the end user. And so powerful. That's what's missing so much in organizations, is that emotional connection. We think, leave your emotions at home, but we're human beings. We don't just turn off our emotions, and you're leaving the best part of us behind if we don't have that sense of caring and connection, because that's actually what makes us human. That's why we've been able to survive and, through teamwork, overcome great odds through centuries.
Sure, excellent teams have a lot of emotion. I mean, they're excited about things.
That's why I love watching basketball.
Yeah.
And the third psychological need that people need, and if they don't have it, there's no way they'll thrive or really achieve their goals. And if they do achieve their goals, they don't have a sense of satisfaction. And that's competence. That we need to feel that we're growing and learning. So it's not that we have to have mastery, but it's that we desire mastery. It's like the little kid, it's not a little kid, it's a toddler learning to walk. They keep falling, right? But they don't start crying and think, oh, I'm such a dumb kid, I can't even walk. Instead, they stand up and they're laughing and they're joyful and they almost run before they can walk. They're so excited, right? And we all have that in us, but it's been drummed out of us. And so that need for competence, for growth and learning and progress.
One of the real challenges, it seems to me, for parents and teachers and leaders is not to dumb down people. I mean, you take that toddler. A good parent is going to cheer that child encourage them, be a cheerleader.
You know what? I'll disagree with you. Is that okay?
Okay.
You don't need to.
Well, that's true, because they're getting up and they're doing it themselves.
What's better, or an alternative, is as they get older, is instead of you cheering them and being their cheerleader, and by the way, I was even a professional cheerleader, so I can talk about cheerleading, is that you want to ask them how they feel about it. Wow, I just noticed, I observed, I see that you led that meeting and everybody was attentive and you made sure everybody had a voice. How did you feel about the way you led that meeting? So it's not you cheering them on and praising them. In fact, Carol Dweck's work in The Growth Mindset says that praising is one of the most detrimental things that we can do to people, because the way it's interpreted by them is that we're evaluating them, we're judging them. And a lot of times, especially children, even adults in the workplace, will associate you love me more when I do what you want me to do and you praise me. So what we're asking leaders, parents, coaches to do is to turn the evaluation on the, inside out. Ask the person, how do they feel about what they've done? But let them know you've noticed, because that's a form of connection.
Well, yeah, for sure. Now, you return again and again to Viktor Frankl's, and I love his story, his reflections from a concentration camp during World War II. Why is his story foundational to your idea of choice?
Yeah, great question. If you think about the fact that here is a man who is in the most dire circumstances where he has no autonomy, supposedly, whatsoever. They're trudging him off to the work camps in freezing weather and starving. And he looks out through the forest and he notices the sun rising and he realizes they can't take that away from me.
Right.
I can choose to see the beauty of that sunrise. And then when he realized that, he realized I could choose to help someone if they fall, even though he knew he'd get whipped for helping someone who fell. He could choose, if he got a piece of bread and the man next to him didn't, to share his piece of bread. So he found ways throughout that horrible experience to make choices. And if you notice, the choices he made was to help others, to make a contribution, to show genuine caring to people. And then he really started to notice what he was learning. He started to make choices that gave him connection, but also enabled him to reflect and learn about himself and his personality. And so Viktor Frankl, through that first step of recognizing that no matter what, you always have a sense of autonomy, even when all your freedom is taken away, led to then his fulfillment of connection and competence. And that's why he thrived, and why when he came out of that concentration camp, he wanted to share that with other people.
Can you even imagine how many millions of people have been blessed by his book, Man's Search for Meaning? I mean, I have seen it cited probably thousands of times over the years.
It's probably one of the only books I've ever read twice or three times. I'm the kind of person, I love books and I'd rather read a new one than read an old one, but I keep going back to it. You're absolutely right. And can I just tell you something I discovered that I think it's fascinating. A lot of people think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I wrote a piece for HBR on what Maslow can't teach you about motivation. It had 75,000 hits in one day. It was really a very successful article. And so I've really been following Maslow, because Maslow was the first person that really started thinking about human needs, satisfying needs rather than drive theory, which was all about more based on our biological drives. So I will never even use the word drive. And so I admired Maslow, but the fact is Maslow never had a hierarchy of needs in a pyramid. That was some ad man who took his work and did that. He would disagree with the way people are using his model today.
Right.
And what's interesting is that he and Viktor Frankl formed an extraordinary friendship, because Viktor Frankl wrote to Maslow and said, this pyramid that you've got is crap, because at the top of the pyramid is not self-actualization. Self-actualization is all about yourself. what really is the pinnacle for a human being is contributing to others, is being connected to others. And so they started this rich dialogue. So I've written about it a number of times, is what Viktor Frankl and Maslow wrote to each other. And it's Maslow's grandson who made those letters public and is urging people to kind of move on from Maslow's hierarchy.
Well, the happiest people I know, and I think you'd probably say this too, are those who invest their energy and their time and everything about them in contributing to others, making a difference in the world, helping others have more fulfilling lives.
Absolutely. And when self-determination theory has cited these 3 psychological needs that I talk about, choice, connection, and competence, even though they use different terms for it, people keep saying, well, shouldn't there be a 4th psychological need, like for meaning? There's a 4th psychological need that they're looking at right now for the need for nature, to have green, that is essential for psychological thriving. But none of these things has actually met the standards necessary to be a foundational human psychological need. But one that they're really looking at, but they now realize it falls under connection, and that is to be benevolent.
Oh, yes.
To care about others to the point where you're giving and giving of yourself. And so there's so much good research on that, Roger. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, language matters, and I'm fascinated by the way you use words in your book. It really causes me to rethink some things. You, for example, favor the phrase show and tell over delegate and dictate. What does great teaching look like inside of an organization?
Do you know, I've been studying that for so long, and my late husband, Dr. Drea Zagarmi, did extraordinary research on leadership and found that one of the most important skills a leader needs to have if they're going to be successful is the ability to teach. And that if you know how to teach, then you're going to create an environment where people are eager to learn. So when you show and tell, you're tapping into people's innate need for competence. You're tapping into their need for choice because you're showing and telling, but you're giving them the choice of how they're going to receive that information, how they're going to use it. And you're showing that you care enough about them to spend the time to teach. The problem a lot of leaders have is that we're working in a world where they're leading people who are doing jobs they don't have a clue how to do.
Right.
It's hard for a lot of leaders to teach people anything because they don't know how to do that person's job. And so what I'm encouraging leaders to do is to recognize the importance of growth and learning and to not have training be the first thing that gets cut back when times are tight. And so if you're a leader and you can't teach people what you know, make sure there's some type of expert or environment where people can learn. So showing and telling is so much more effective than eroding people's sense of autonomy through dictating.
Well, I think back to my childhood when I spent so much time with my grandfather, and he was an uneducated man in terms of schooling, but a very wise man. And as I think back, he was world class in showing and telling. I had a lot of chores on the farm, but he would show me and tell me and explain why something needed to be done a certain way. And then he would ask me, do you see it differently? Do you have another idea? And not only did I learn to love the man, I mean, dearly love the man. He's one of the first people I want to see in heaven, I'll tell you. He taught me how to teach, and he taught me how to coach. He taught me how to coach leaders. And you're using some language that really brings it alive, and I appreciate that.
Do you know what, Roger? What you just did is so important. And that is, I think we all need to look at people who have been our great mentors or teachers in our lives and say, what is it that they did? And then deconstruct it and say, how did they help me fulfill my need for choice, connection, and competence? And that's why I'm reaching out to coaches who are really successful. Like I want to sit down with Steve Kerr I'm going to just put it out there, of the Golden State Warriors, because he, for me, is an exemplar coach. Greg Popovich of the San Antonio Spurs, exemplar coach. I want to go to coaches who they have been doing it right, and they might not even know why they're doing it right.
And they might not use this language at all.
Oh, they don't. I'm sure they don't.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, my next book is going to be called Ripple Effects.
Ooh. Oh, I love that.
Every chapter is going to be about a particular individual who has had an impact on my life and then has helped me hopefully have an impact on other people's lives. And, some of those go back to elementary school. I just wasn't thinking about it at the time, but I think back now and I think, wow, what that teacher did made all the difference in the world. I still remember it all these years later.
Roger, do me a favor. As you're writing that book, encourage other people to do what you're doing.
Oh, sure.
Because to be grateful for our past teachers and then to understand what it is they did so that we can do it and we can create our own ripple effects. At the end of every one of my speeches, when I speak to leaders, that's the analogy I use, is the ripple effect. I even have a visual of a stone going into a lake with the ripple effects. So I love that. Good for you.
Well, and I've seen a lot of negative ripple effects too.
Yeah, good point.
For sure. So, that's a different book.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
Well, now you describe mindfulness, values, and purpose as the MVPs of self-regulation. Why those three, and why in that particular order?
Well, those three, the MVPs, are of optimal motivation. So earlier I described the three suboptimal motivational outlooks. The three optimal motivational outlooks, where you have all three of your psychological needs fulfilled. The way you do that, how do we as leaders or as individuals, how do we experience those optimal outlooks? And the way is through mindfulness, values, and purpose. So one of the optimal motivational outlooks is called the aligned motivational outlook. And this is where you're doing something because whatever you're being asked to do or whatever you've decided to do is based on a value that you have. Now, the problem with that is that a lot of people don't know what their values are. And for 25 years, my husband and I taught at the University of San Diego a week-long program that kickstarted a 2-year Master's of Science in Executive Leadership. We had people like Gary Ridge, who's the
WD-40
CEO of WD-40. He was in our first cohort and a very dear friend since then. And so what we would teach was how to develop values, because most of us are operating on programmed values. Whenever we talk about Gen X, Gen Z, baby boomers, all the generational stuff, those are program values. Those are values based on when we grew up, how we grew up, who our cohorts were. I know parents would like to think that their value system is what their children will have, but research shows that children adapt the values of the people around them, their cohortal group, the generation that they're born into. But those are programmed, and we can develop values that we actually choose to have. And so the aligned motivational outlook is around values. And then the integrated motivational outlook is when you are so connected to a sense of purpose. And so much so that it's almost hard to tell if you're intrinsically or extrinsically motivated in that moment, that when you're doing something that is you identify with as a human being. So let me just give you an example. 45 years ago, I saw a documentary about the way we treat animals that we eat. And I became a vegetarian overnight. And I thought, later, how did I do that? Because people kept saying, you're so disciplined, you have so much willpower. And it didn't take any of that. That is actually what kickstarted my search about why was I motivated to give up meat, because I loved meat. And what I realized later was that when I first became a vegetarian, it was based on values, that I had a value around the way we treat each other and the animals and the planet, and that eating meat was not aligned with those values. So I had what's called an aligned motivational outlook, and I was very conscious of it. And so I would get kind of frustrated sometimes when I go to a restaurant. 45 years ago, there was nothing vegetarian on menus, and they didn't even have pasta. So I was eating, I was living on baked potatoes and salads. And so I would have to get back in touch with, okay, Susan, but the reason you're doing this is because you have compassion and because you care. So I would have to remind myself, and then I could shift from being imposed and angry to aligned and at peace. Now, if you asked me, Susan, describe yourself. Who are you? Part of my description would be, I'm a vegetarian. It's how I define myself, and it's not even conscious anymore. It's just what I do. And I don't get angry if somebody doesn't have a vegetarian. I just go, okay, well, that's fine. I've, got some nuts in my purse. I'll eat, and so it's just who I am. So that's the integrated motivational outlook. And then there's the intrinsic, or pure, what I call inherent. It's the purely intrinsic motivation, where you love doing something and you don't know why. There's no rhyme or reason for it. You just love it. Like for me, speaking. I am inherently motivated to speak. I love it. I can tell you when I first learned that I loved it, but I love it. And there's no other reason. It's not like a value. It's not like a integrated motivational outlook. It's fun. Something I enjoy doing. And so those are the three optimal motivational outlooks. And so values and purpose, but to get to values and purpose, and if you want to just short circuit and get to optimal motivation, the fastest way is through mindfulness. Kirk Warren Brown has done some extraordinary research in neuroscience around showing that when your 3 psychological needs are satisfied, it's the same part of your brain that lights up as when you're in a mindful state. So when we meditate or when we become mindful, we automatically override the pleasure center of our brain, which is what's triggered by, the dopamine and the external rewards and all that stuff. And we actually create a natural dopamine that is more sustainable and is a higher level of vitality. You're actually more creative. You're more sensitive. You're more insightful. And so, mindfulness is kind of the end all be all if you really want to live in a state of grace and optimal motivation.
Now, you share so many great stories, and one of them is the story of its beloved story about the dancing toll booth operator on the Bay Bridge. Tell our listeners that story, and then tell us what that story illustrates about purpose.
So Charles Garfield was studying excellence and performance. And so he was going across the Bay Bridge in the San Francisco area, and he did it every single day. And he would drive through, and back then it was a pay toll. So he'd pay his 50 cents and then he'd, go on his merry way. And this one day he gets to this toll booth, and the toll booth operator comes out of the booth and looks at Garfield and he says, "Hey man, how you doing today? Give me your 50 cents and you'll be on your way." And he was singing and he was dancing. And so Garfield, gave him his 50 cents and he was like, whoa, I've been across this bridge hundreds of times and I've never run into that before. And he's driving away and he starts thinking, oh my gosh, that's a peak performer. That's who I'm studying. I need to talk to that guy.
Yeah.
So he actually looks back and figures out what toll booth he just gone through. And he found that guy and he interviewed him. And he said, "What's your deal?" And it turns out that the toll booth operator, he said, "I'm an aspiring actor, dancer, singer." And he says, "And I don't have a gig. And so I'm taking tolls." He says, "But I realize that it's not that I just want to be a dancer, singer, and actor. It's that I am a dancer, singer, and actor. That's who I am. I'm a performer. And so I don't have to just look at my toll booth as a cage. I could look at it as a place to perform and to bring people pleasure." And so he didn't see what he was doing as something other than who he was, his sense of purpose. And so that was a great example of what we call the integrated motivational outlook.
I can picture the man dancing at the toll booth.
I know.
So,
and isn't it such a joy when you find people who are on mundane jobs and they're able to bring joy to you, and they realize, I'm sure, that they're bringing joy to themselves as well. I can't tell you how often now, if I get a really grumpy service person or whatever, I'll just look at them and say, "Having a bad day?" And then all of a sudden they'll either tell me what's going on or they'll realize how they're coming across and they'll change their behavior.
Well, words count. Language counts. As we have this conversation, I think about, and I haven't been there very many times, I think of Chick-fil-A. And when the server brings you your food, if you say thank you, which I always will, they never say no problem, which I think is one of the worst comments you can know. Well, I hope it's not a problem. What they say is my pleasure.
Love it.
They've been taught to say my pleasure. And I've talked to some of their employees, and they say in their own way, language matters. When we use that kind of language, it really does become a pleasure, and we really do enjoy our work.
Oh, I mean, there's been so much research around that, and it just makes me sad that we don't take that more seriously. And that's one of the reasons I love being a writer, is because I love playing with words, and I think about how language started. Actually, my degree is in anthropology, and I'm thinking about early man stubbed a toe and went, ouch, and just made a sound. And so that word ouch reflects an energy that is painful. And so words were created out of a need to express what somebody was feeling and thinking. And so there is an energy behind every word. And so, yes, thank you for continuing to reinforce that words matter.
Well, and I'll digress a little bit here, but as you well know and have stated, language matters not only in terms of the people with whom we're interacting, but the language has an effect on us. And I'm reminded of a time years ago, my wife was on the local board of Habitat for Humanity. And one weekend they were building 10 homes, and they were going to do it in like 36 hours. They had the slabs down, and these were simple 2 and 3 bedroom homes, but they had hundreds of volunteers over there. And I went over there to help with some things, and most of the people were from local churches, and they had their church ministers with them. So I was watching one guy put up sheetrock, wallboard, and these were not professional sheetrockers. They were accountants and lawyers and whatever. And so he was putting up sheetrock, and he got out of sync, and he slammed his thumb really hard with the hammer. And he drops the hammer, grabs his thumb, looks around, and says, ouch. So always a social scientist, I went over and asked if I would help with some first aid. And I said, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? He said, I guess so. I said, I noticed that when you slammed your thumb with the hammer, you said, ouch. And he said, yeah, it hurts. And I said, is it possible that under some other circumstance you might have said something else? And he said, not with my preacher standing 3 feet away. So I said, you decided in that nanosecond, you rummaged around in your mind and you decided, this time I'm going to say ouch. He said, yeah. So, that just reminded me, we do have a choice in an instant, the kind of language you're going to use, and language matters.
What a wonderful example. And so that is somebody who consciously, so again, I would look at it from a motivational perspective, was aligned. I would imagine he wasn't saying, yeah, I had to watch my language because my minister's there, and saying that out of resentment. He was saying it out of respect
and
out of choice. And that's the aligned motivational outlook. If he had said, yeah, I was afraid of what's going to happen to me if I cursed around my minister, that would have been imposed motivation. So that is why I really want leaders to understand this. You could have people who come to a meeting all saying the same thing, but have a very different motivational outlook for being there. Or you can have a salesperson two salespeople who are really knocking it out with sales. And one guy's doing it because, boy, he really wants that trip. And the second person is doing it because they love service, they love their product, and they really want to satisfy their client. And they might both be doing good sales right now, but the research will show you that the one that's going to sustain the sales and not have this roller coaster of sales is going to be the guy who's doing it with optimal motivation, not the guy who's doing it with suboptimal motivation.
Yeah. Well, we live in a world now where there's a lot of so-called hybrid work. In fact, it's become kind of the central design challenge for a lot of people.
Sure has.
How do the 3 needs, choice, connection, and competence, change when the office is partially virtual?
I think the dilemma is that people loved choice, meaning more discretionary time,
Right.
that they have more flexible work hours, and that flexibility really fulfilled their need for choice. But then what was sacrificed was the need for connection. And oftentimes the need for competence was challenged because of technology or because of a lack of training. And so the companies that have really thrived during this shift in the way we work are the companies who recognize that. And I work with a wonderful company led by a man named Chris Wallerman, who is actually in our, I think, 5th cohort of our University of San Diego master's program, who embraced these ideas and built a company, Inspire Software, around all of these ideas. And so they asked me to come in when they were dealing with this. And I consulted with Chris. And then what he did was he brought everybody together. They had a big, wonderful party, and they served really great Mexican food, and they had a band. It was just, they said, we're going to get together and we're going to celebrate. And what he told everybody was, we need to come together at least twice a week. And what I'd like to do is build a case for why we need to come together. And it's for training and for interacting like we're doing today.
Right.
And especially for new people joining our company, to actually help share our culture. But I want you to choose the 2 days of week that we come together. And so what he did was he created choice, connection, and competence in that one statement, and the way that he presented the alternatives. And he also explained why that they were going to lose their lease if they didn't actually use the space.
Exactly.
And so he said, and there's some self-serving needs here too. And so let me just be honest about that. I'm a business person, and, he explained all that. So it was transparency. It was vulnerability. All of those things built connection, right? And then giving people, what days do you want to choose? And they chose Tuesday, Thursday. So every Tuesday, Thursday, everybody came into the office. Yeah. And they were able then to work from home on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays if that was appropriate for their job.
Well, that works a whole lot better than imposing your will on people.
Thank you. And when people work in imposed motivation, you're just not going to get what you need from them.
No, not at all.
And also, they're not thriving, and there's going to be long-term costs.
Oh, sure. And I've often said that the second most expensive thing that can happen is when your best and brightest people quit and leave. But the most expensive is when your best and brightest people quit and stay.
Absolutely.
That's really expensive.
Do you know, Roger, after COVID, there was so much good research that was done that we really learned a lot from. And one of the studies was done by McKinsey, and they talked to thousands of people who either left in the great, when everybody left and quit their jobs after COVID was over. And then there was the great quitting, the great reckoning or whatever. And what they found, which I thought was fascinating, was that there were 3 primary reasons that people either left the jobs they were in or wanted to leave the jobs they were in. The first, and they even had this as a subtitle, anything for autonomy. Okay, so that was choice. That people wanted jobs where they felt like things weren't being imposed on them. They loved some discretionary time. The second was they wanted to get out of what they felt was a toxic environment where profits and short-term gains meant more than the people and the health and well-being of the people in the company. That oftentimes those leaders would make statements like, well, people are our greatest assets. No, people are not an asset. People are your company. And so whenever you think of people as an asset, you can take them or leave them. You treat them differently. So that was the second thing, which was, guess what? Connection. And then the third reason they left was a lack of growth and learning opportunities, which, guess what, is the third psychological need for competence. So the very reason that McKinsey says people leave organizations is what the research shows us, is that their psychological needs are not being fulfilled. They're being undermined and thwarted. But here's the problem. Individuals don't understand that. So they go to the next job that offers them the greatest external rewards, perks, benefits, time off, whatever. And then they get themselves right back into that environment where their psychological needs are not being fulfilled. So I want to teach individuals, no matter where you are, how do you fulfill your psychological needs so you can thrive and achieve your goals? And how do we help leaders create environments where people can bring their best selves to work?
Well, that brings up another question that I think is related here. Many performance review systems still reward results regardless of how those results were achieved. If you were designing a performance review system, what would be its focus?
Oh, we need a whole hour for that. I've seen some actually decent ones out there, Roger. And I think, again, I don't care what it is you're setting up. If it's a performance review system, if it's a mentoring program. And I've done a consulting with a lot of organizations where we actually use what we call the psychological needs checklist. And we look at whatever system you're setting up and say, how is this system either fulfilling or thwarting people's psychological needs? So if you have a performance review system, and here's the big thing, most leaders feel like they're thwarting their own need for choice, right? They have to have a performance management system. So the first thing that leaders need to do is shift their own motivation for actually doing performance reviews.
Right.
And then really talk to people about, here's what I've observed. Here are the choices that you made. How did those choices feel good or contribute to our clients and our customers? Talk about the choices you made that helped you do something that you felt was worthwhile or made a contribution. Talk about the choices you've made where you've grown and learned. What did you learn from that experience? If we could actually create performance review systems based on the choices that people are making, how they're connecting those choices to what's important and meaningful and contributing to the welfare of everybody, and choices that help them learn and grow, those would be so much more valuable than judgments or rankings.
Well, and I think reviews shouldn't be on a quarterly or semi-annual basis.
Every
I think
day.
there should be every day, constant communication.
What if at the end of every week, let's say you're my manager, instead of saying to me, so Susan, what'd you accomplish this week? What if you said, Susan, tell me how you grew and what you learned this week. How do you felt that you made a contribution? If I could give you a quick example, Ryan Dupick is the head coach of baseball of Concordia University in Nebraska. And he reached out to me because his team had a winning season, but the only reason they were winning, he thought, was because he had gotten throat cancer or tongue cancer. And his team rallied around. His brother came in, his father came in to help coach, and the team rallied around him. And Ryan wrote to me and he said, Susan, I don't want to have to keep getting cancer in order for my team to win. Right? How can I create this environment? So we really thought about it and talked about it. And what he did first, which was just a simple thing, at the end of every practice, he grouped the kids together, and that he and the other coaches didn't have any interaction with them, but he asked the young players to answer 3 questions. Talk about the choices you made at practice today and how your choices helped the team. And what did you learn today that's going to make you a better player? 3 questions about choice, connection, and competence. He said their practices totally shifted. The energy totally shifted. And then Ryan started using that in his conversations with his players. And he had a pitcher who was just so talented, but he had real problems at home, and he, just wasn't always showing up, and he was late. And so Ryan started coaching him using these ideas. And that young man got picked up by Cleveland. And it was the first time in their school's history that one of their players went to the majors. And
Wow.
Ryan will talk about this. We're going to write about it in my new book. He's out there now. I gave him permission to go out and talk about the spectrum of motivation and about choice, connection, and competence. So he's one of those exemplar coaches. By the way, the team went for the first time in its history to the NIAs, and they've been having winning seasons ever since.
The proof is in the pudding, as they say. And he didn't have those conversations on a quarterly basis.
That's right. Exactly. Every practice.
Well, let's talk very briefly here about AI. Artificial intelligence seems to be sort of rewriting, especially white-collar work, in real time. What does the rise of AI imply for the way leaders need to think about motivation?
This is something I've really been thinking a lot about. And I have a young man, I don't know if he's that young, but Aaron Robbins. So look for his TEDx talk that's going to be coming out in a couple of months on don't let AI rob you of your humanity. And it's based on this work, on our work. And he's part of my Mojo Moments team. And so one of the things that scares me the most that I think leaders really need to understand is that one of the reasons people love AI is because it's programmed with sycophony, to be a sycophant, to praise you, to make you think that you're the smartest thing ever and that you have great insight. And so I think two things there. We really need to train people on how to use AI and how to prevent falling trapped by that sycophony. But also, you can actually turn it off. I work with Claude, and I just say, Claude, give me a break. Stop with all the just be direct, and one time I asked him a question and then I said, would you have said it that way if you weren't just trying to butter me up?
Yeah.
And he says, well, no, here's the truth.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You can challenge AI.
Yeah, exactly.
You can call them on the behavior and they'll sort of snap out of it.
But I think what's happening is that in so many industries, people are feeling imposed, and that imposed motivational outlook where it's fear. I mean, a lot of people are supposed to train AI to take over their own jobs. And so because, just again, think about this, AI leaving people feeling, I don't have a choice. This is here whether I want it or not. The future is here, and I don't have a choice about it. I don't know how it's helping humanity. It's giving me a false sense of connection with what I was just talking about. I mean, it's kind of like social media. We think that we have all these friends because they like what we post.
Right.
And the fact is, it's not fulfilling our need for connection because it's not genuine and caring and mutual. And then thirdly, nobody knows where this is going. Nobody has competence around it. So the very idea of AI right now is eroding all of our psychological needs. And so that means we need to be more vigilant about, wow, whenever I am engaged in this, how do I make choices that are real and genuine and are bringing a sense of connection? And how do I continue to learn and grow? I have to tell you, I'm on AI for hours every day, not just because I think it's helpful to me, but because I need to keep up. I need to know what's going on. I need to build my competence around it.
They can be great search engines.
I love it, but I've spent months training my Claude.
Absolutely. And you can train them. Well, one final question here. After more than 3 decades teaching this work in more than 40 countries, what still surprises you about how leaders react to the science of motivation?
They're scared. In fact, I'm doing a presentation at the Self-Determination Theory Conference. I'm actually speaking twice at the conference in Geneva next month. And my presentation is about what I've learned from the front lines, and that is that leaders have become so dependent on external motivators and this idea that they can motivate people. And it sometimes a sense of power and control that they want, that it's a hard sell for them to say, wow, how do I nurture people's choice, connection, and competence? It's a whole new set of skills. And so I think what surprises me is sometimes the resistance, the need to keep doing things the old way. And people spend 75% of their time awake as an adult connected to their work. It's getting ready for work. It's getting to work. It's working. It's getting home from work. It's decompressing from work. Even if you work from home, maybe more than 75% of your time. And if we're not having our psychological needs filled through our work, we're not having them fulfilled. So we're not thriving, not just at work, but even in our lives.
Oh, sure.
There's no such thing as compensatory need satisfaction.
No, yeah. And the ripple effect on families and marriages, et cetera, it's amazing.
It's amazing. So I think organizations have a responsibility, a duty, but it's in their own best interest as well to help foster these ideas and not be resistant to them, and to care more about people not as assets, but as the very reason that you're in business.
Yes. Well, Susan Fowler, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership. Susan Fowler's invitation is deceptively simple. Stop trying to motivate the people in your life, including yourself, and start protecting the conditions that produce optimal motivation. Stop mistaking the rush of a junk food incentive for the lasting fuel of a meaningful one. Stop asking what motivates you and start asking, why are you motivated? If she's right, and 45 years of motivation science suggests she is, the work of leadership looks less like driving people toward outcomes and more like clearing the path for choice, connection, and competence to take root. The rest takes care of itself. To learn more about Susan and her work, go to mojomoments.com. Share this episode with your friends and associates. Be sure to leave a review of our podcast because even a single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content that the Leadership podcast provides. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.